There are moments in history when the world does not realize it is standing at the edge until it is already too late. Tonight feels like one of those moments. Across the Middle East, tension is no longer abstract. It is visible, measurable, and steadily rising. Statements from Washington are sharper than before. Signals from Tehran are colder and more deliberate. And in between, the Gulf region is once again becoming the center of gravity for global anxiety. This is not a declaration of war, it is something more dangerous. It is a prolonged pause filled with pressure, miscalculation, and strategic fear. When senior political figures in the United States hint that history may be unfolding within hours, analysts do not ask whether a crisis exists. They ask why the final decision has not yet been made. Military assets appear closer. Diplomatic language grows thinner. Yet no order is given. That silence is not hesitation, it is calculation. Every major power involved understands that once the first move is made, there is no clean exit. Iran understands this. Israel understands this. And Washington understands it more than anyone else. The question is not whether force is available. It is whether force can still produce control. Over the past decades, the Middle East has taught a brutal lesson. Superior firepower does not guarantee strategic victory. It often guarantees prolonged instability. This is why the current moment matters. Because what looks like restraint may actually be fear of consequences. Fear that a single strike could trigger reactions far beyond intention. Fear that markets will react faster than missiles. Fear that allies may hesitate when pressure becomes real. And fear that once escalation begins, credibility will demand continuation. This is the paradox of power. The stronger a state becomes, the more cautious it must be when using that power. Tonight does not feel like peace. It feels like the silence before a storm that everyone hopes will not arrive. But history reminds us that storms often begin precisely when leaders believe they still have time to stop them. To understand the danger of the current moment, we must look inside Iran itself, not just at its borders. On the surface, Iranian state media projects calm. Streets appear orderly, daily life continues, the message is stability, control, normalcy. But beneath that image lies a far more fragile reality. Protests have erupted in waves, driven by economic pressure, political frustration, and a deep sense of exhaustion among segments of the population. This is not new. Iran has experienced unrest before. What is different now is timing. Internal tension is rising at the exact moment external pressure is intensifying. Historically, this combination has produced unpredictable outcomes. Western observers often assume that visible protests signal imminent regime collapse. That assumption is dangerously simplistic. Iran is not a weak state surviving on illusion alone. It is a system built around resilience under pressure. Security institutions are designed to absorb unrest. Control mechanisms tighten when challenged. And narratives of foreign interference are quickly deployed to justify harsher measures. In moments like this, the leadership in Tehran does not see protests as isolated events. It sees them as potential entry points for external influence. That perception shapes every response. The more Iran feels threatened from abroad, the less room there is for compromise at home. This creates a tragic feedback loop. External pressure strengthens internal repression. Internal repression fuels further unrest, and unrest reinforces the belief that the state must act even more forcefully. For Washington and its allies, this presents a strategic dilemma. Any action taken in the name of deterrence risks validating the very narrative Tehran uses to consolidate power. Yet inaction carries its own cost. It signals limits and invites testing, and it raises doubts among allies who depend on American credibility. The streets of Iran therefore matter not because they guarantee change, but because they alter the strategic psychology of every actor involved. This is not a revolution waiting to happen. It is a pressure cooker. And pressure cookers rarely release energy safely when shaken from the outside. From Washington's perspective, the Iran dilemma is not about capability. It is about consequences. The United States retains overwhelming military power. It can strike, it can disrupt, it can inflict damage at will. But power does not eliminate cost. It multiplies responsibility. Every option on the table carries strategic risk that extends far beyond the battlefield. A full-scale attack could cripple Iranian infrastructure, but it would almost certainly trigger regional retaliation. Energy markets would react instantly. Allies would be pulled into a conflict they did not choose, and once engaged, the United States would face pressure to escalate rather than withdraw. A limited strike appears safer on paper, but history suggests the opposite. Partial force often provokes defiance rather than submission. It invites asymmetric responses and prolonged instability. The third option, restraint combined with pressure, is often criticized as weakness. In reality, it is a recognition of structural limits. Washington must weigh domestic politics, alliance cohesion, economic stability, and long-term credibility simultaneously. Acting too aggressively risks war fatigue at home. Acting too cautiously risks eroding deterrence abroad. This is why delays occur. Not because leaders lack resolve, but because resolve without strategy leads to disaster. The legacy of past interventions looms large. Every decision is filtered through memories of conflicts that promised quick victories and delivered endless commitments. Iran is not isolated. It sits at the intersection of global trade routes, regional alliances, and great power rivalry. Any move against Tehran sends signals far beyond the Middle East. It speaks to rivals. It reassures or alarms partners, and it reshapes perceptions of American judgment. In this context, hesitation is not indecision. It is acknowledgement that no option offers control without sacrifice. The real danger lies not in waiting, but in believing that waiting itself will resolve the problem. Pressure accumulates, expectations rise, and eventually even restraint becomes unsustainable. For Israel, the Iranian question is not theoretical, it is existential. Unlike Washington, Israel does not have the luxury of distance. Any escalation involving Iran places Israeli territory directly within range of retaliation. This reality shapes every strategic calculation in Tel Aviv. Iranian capabilities are viewed not as future risks, but as present threats. Missile development, regional proxies, and long-term influence campaigns are interpreted through the lens of survival. At the same time, Israeli leadership understands the limits of unilateral action. A regional conflict cannot be contained by one state alone. Support from the United States is essential, but not guaranteed in every scenario. This creates a delicate balance. Israel must signal resolve without forcing Washington into a corner. Public statements expressing solidarity with the Iranian people serve multiple purposes. They project moral alignment, they undermine Tehran's narrative, and they maintain international legitimacy. Yet behind closed doors, assessments are colder. Protests inside Iran are closely monitored, but they are not overestimated. Israeli strategists know that regimes under pressure often become more aggressive, not less. The fear is not sudden collapse, it is uncontrolled escalation. If Iran perceives existential threat, it may act preemptively. If Israel acts too boldly, it risks triggering the very confrontation it seeks to avoid. This is why coordination matters. Israel's role is not to ignite the conflict, but to shape the conditions under which decisions are made. Every signal, every exercise, every public remark is part of a broader effort to maintain deterrence without crossing irreversible lines. In this environment, silence can be as meaningful as action, and restraint can be as strategic as force. The Israeli calculation is simple and terrifying at the same time. Prevent the worst outcome without becoming the trigger for it. History shows how difficult that balance is to maintain. At the center of this crisis, three strategic scenarios dominate every closed-door discussion, and there is no fourth option waiting in reserve. The first scenario is full-scale military action. In this case, the United States would seek to disable Iranian command structures, missile capabilities, and critical military infrastructure in a concentrated campaign. On paper, this appears decisive. In reality, it risks uncontrollable escalation. Iran has spent decades preparing for asymmetric retaliation. Regional allies, shipping routes, and energy facilities would become immediate pressure points. A decisive strike could quickly transform into a regional conflict with global economic consequences. The second scenario is limited action. Precision strikes aimed at select targets designed to send a warning without igniting full war. History shows that this approach is often the most dangerous. Partial force rarely produces partial reactions. It invites defiance, symbolic retaliation, and long-term instability. Iran would be incentivized to respond in ways that avoid direct confrontation while still imposing costs. The result would be a prolonged shadow conflict rather than resolution. The third scenario is sustained pressure without direct military engagement. This includes rhetoric sanctions, military positioning, and psychological signaling. Critics label this weakness. Strategists recognize it as risk management. This approach seeks to shape behavior without crossing irreversible thresholds. It preserves flexibility. It avoids forcing adversaries into existential corners. But it comes with a cost. Pressure without action must be maintained indefinitely. Credibility must be reinforced through consistency. Any visible hesitation undermines deterrence. This is why there is no fourth option. Diplomacy alone lacks leverage. Force alone lacks control, and waiting carries its own dangers. Decision-makers are trapped within these boundaries, attempting to choose not the best outcome, but the least destructive one. Beyond military planning rooms, the true consequences of escalation would unfold across the region and the global economy. The Gulf is not just a battlefield, it is an artery. Energy flows through it. Trade depends on it. Confidence is anchored to its stability. Any disruption, even brief, would reverberate worldwide. This is why Iranian warnings about retaliation must be understood as strategic messaging rather than fixed promises. Deterrence relies on uncertainty. By signaling potential responses, Tehran seeks to raise the perceived cost of action without firing a single shot. Markets respond to perception faster than governments respond to events. Insurance rates spike. Shipping routes reroute. Prices fluctuate. These effects occur before any missile launches. Regional states understand this vulnerability. Many have invested heavily in avoiding direct entanglement. Public neutrality masks private anxiety. They fear becoming collateral damage in a confrontation they did not choose. This reluctance complicates planning for any external intervention. Without regional access and cooperation, operational costs rise dramatically, time horizons extend, risks multiply. Iran understands this as well. Its strategy does not depend on military victory, it depends on endurance. By surviving pressure and demonstrating resilience, Tehran reinforces its narrative of resistance. This dynamic places external powers in a dilemma. Escalation imposes costs on everyone. Restraint shifts the burden of patience. The Gulf therefore becomes not a trigger, but a constraint. It limits options. It amplifies consequences, and it ensures that any miscalculation will be felt far beyond the immediate actors involved. As traditional military options grow riskier, attention increasingly turns to non-kinetic tools. Cyber operations, information control, and economic pressure are often presented as cleaner alternatives to force. In practice, their effectiveness is limited by structure and time. Iran has invested heavily in insulating its core systems. Network redundancies exist, controls tighten quickly under threat, cyber disruptions may inconvenience, but they rarely transform political realities. Information warfare faces similar barriers. External messaging struggles to penetrate environments where media is tightly regulated. Even when access exists, fragmented connectivity reduces scale and coordination. Economic pressure has long been a central pillar of strategy, yet its impact is double-edged. Sanctions weaken economies, but they also harden narratives. Leaders frame hardship as proof of external hostility. Domestic dissent is redirected outward. This does not mean these tools are useless. It means they are slow. They shape environments rather than outcomes. They influence margins rather than delivering decisive change. For policymakers under pressure to act, patience becomes politically expensive. Non-kinetic strategies demand consistency, restraint, and long-term commitment. They do not satisfy demands for immediate results. This creates a temptation to combine them with force, hoping to accelerate impact. History suggests this combination often backfires. Pressure layered upon pressure compresses systems until they fracture unpredictably. The illusion of control fades. What remains is escalation by accumulation rather than decision. In the Iranian context, this risk is particularly acute. Structural resilience, ideological framing, and regional entanglements limit the effectiveness of indirect pressure. The result is a strategic stalemate where action and restraint carry comparable uncertainty. The current moment is often described as a pause. That description is misleading. It is not a pause in conflict. It is a pause in decision. Pressure continues to build beneath the surface. Signals accumulate, expectations harden. Each actor waits for the other to move first, hoping to avoid responsibility for escalation while preparing for it nonetheless. History teaches that such moments are among the most dangerous, not because leaders seek war, but because systems drift toward it through miscalculation. The absence of action is interpreted as weakness. The presence of force is interpreted as intent. Communication narrows. Trust evaporates. In this environment, restraint becomes increasingly difficult to sustain. Iran seeks survival and leverage. Israel seeks security and deterrence. The United States seeks control without entrapment. These objectives are not fully compatible. Yet none of the actors desires uncontrolled war. This is the central contradiction. Power without alignment produces instability. The longer decisions are deferred, the more constrained future choices become. Eventually, events force action, a provocation, an accident, a misread signal. At that point, strategy gives way to reaction. This is why the current silence matters. It is not calm. It is tension held in place by fear of consequence. Whether that fear continues to restrain or eventually fails will shape not only the Middle East, but the global order connected to it. History does not announce its turning points. It reveals them only after the fact. The question facing the world tonight is simple and unsettling. Is restraint still a choice, or merely the final delay before momentum takes over?